Well, Sumit, I am so glad that we are having this conversation today about cancer. So, everybody knows we made this crazy attempt on our crazy schedules back in January on Inauguration Day to record this, and we and it's completely screwed up. So, we had to do it again. So, we're back. We're back. So, Sumit, let's talk about cancer. Now, I'd love for you to share why this is kind of, I think of you as this is the hill you're going to die on. You're going to change cancer care and cancer diagnostics in the world. But I'd love for you to share your story because I think it's so meaningful.
Yeah, sure. So, cancer is my second career essentially. My first career was in Silicon Valley. I was a venture capital private equity guy. I was a tech entrepreneur. And then after I sold my company, unfortunately, my only sibling, my younger sister, 3 months later got diagnosed with cancer and a year and a half later passed away. And that's why and how I got into cancer 15 years ago. And so since then, I've been fairly obsessed with trying to figure out, what is the key to cancer and how you can really move the needle. And that includes diagnostic applications, therapeutic applications, all of which we're thinking about and different ways to work through them. Personally, I got very involved in cancer as well on the philanthropy side. I run two nonprofits, two 501(c)(3)s. One of them is called Cure Sonia. My sister's name was Sonia. That I've been running for 13 years. And in that one, we fund cancer research at Stanford, MD Anderson, USC, City of Hope. We do financial assistance for underprivileged families that can't pay for their cancer care. I'm one of the largest registrars of bone marrow donors in the world. I've registered over 10,000 people in 300 drives across 60 cities. I was nominated for the National Board of LS, Leukemia Lymphoma Society for that reason, and I've been nominated for my PhDs for that reason, and as well as others. And then we started our second nonprofit last year, which you know about as well, which is Save a Firefighter, another 501(c)(3), where we're raising funds to screen all the firefighters across the country because unfortunately they have up to 3 times the incidence of cancer as the general population. And a lot of people don't realize that firefighters don't die from collapsing buildings and fires generally; they die from cancer. It's
Yeah.
74% line of duty death. It's the number one cause of occupational line of duty death, and so something like 3 out of 4. It's a staggering number.
It is staggering. I mean, my husband's a firefighter and paramedic for the Dallas and just retired. And what's even more staggering is how much the organizations will try and claim, despite the science and true known risk,
Sure.
that it's not a line of duty death too. And so that on top of being sick, you have to fight.
Right.
But I think the more scary thing is, you know, diagnostics, I'm going to air quote diagnostics have gotten better, but our cancer rates are skyrocketing all over the world, and I think the problem is the greater part of the industry, particularly the massive machination of treatment and diagnostics, are kind of ignoring why. That's
Sure.
huge.
Sure. I mean, they are ignoring why largely. I mean, there's lots of reasons, and they get convoluted and they're complicated. I think one of the primary things that's happening right now is that we live a very sedentary lifestyle. Historically, we haven't done that. We've been very active. We're hunters, gatherers, and now we're very sedentary, and that lends itself to metabolic disease, all kinds of syndromes, everything from heart disease to diabetes, being overweight, obesity, all of which create inflammation. And that inflammation creates a breeding ground for erroneous cellular replication, essentially mutated precancerous cells. And so you see a lot of that. I think a second thing that's happening is we're just living longer, right? We're living biological organisms. And as living biological organisms, we constantly have cellular turnover. Old cells are dying and new cells are being formed, and old cells are dying and new cells are being formed. And as this process continues, over a long period of time, the more replications you have, the longer you live, the more likely it is there can be an error, i.e., a precancerous mutated replication. That contributes to it. I think other factors that contributed to it are that we eat too frequently.
Yeah, I agree.
The human body was not designed to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. That's a purely commercial construct that started about 100 years ago with the advent of grocery stores, the first one being Piggly Wiggly in 1916, Tennessee. And, historically, we lived in periods of feast and famine. And famine was important because it triggered certain processes in our body, like autophagy, which is essentially our body's cellular, recycling, cleansing process. And that doesn't happen as frequently now because we're stuffing ourselves with protein bars and cereal boxes and protein shakes and all kinds of stuff because we're told that we have to eat 5 times a day or our body will start eating healthy cardiac mass. And that's just not true. And so there's just a lot of kind of misinformation out there that people don't understand. But I think when you kind of compound our sedentary lifestyles, you compound sort of the fact that we eat too frequently, we're living longer, And you also look at the environmental toxicity that we face. Like, we talked a little bit about like products like acne products. I mean, household products, for example, if you look at, Estee Lauder Clinique, Target Up and Up, Clarisil, the active ingredient is benzoyl peroxide. That's fine, but the thing about benzoyl peroxide is it's not heat stable. It turns into benzene, and benzene is a highly toxic known carcinogen. In fact, it's one of the things that a lot of firefighters get exposed to, unfortunately. And
Yes.
and that, depending on which environmental standard we're looking at, the acceptable levels of benzene are 1 to 4 parts per million. When they tested some of these household products that we just mentioned, they were kicking off several hundred to several thousand parts per million. You're talking orders of magnitude more than what is acceptable. And, to make matters worse, who's using these products? Well, teenagers, because they're going through puberty, they're breaking out with acne. And so, if these teenagers are using it while they go through puberty, what happens during puberty? Well, your body surges with growth hormone. So you're
Right.
taking this highly toxic compound at thousands of times the concentration that you should, applying it onto your skin, having it seep into your bloodstream. Well, you can create cellular damage, and your body is surging with growth hormone that makes everything grow: good cells, bad cells, cancer cells, non cancer cells. So, you just look at all these things. There's a lot of reasons that we're seeing increases in cancer rates, even across the board. And colorectal cancers and people under 55 have now doubled in the last 30 years, and we continue to see increases, just various things. It's concerning.
Yeah. When I think, what people don't realize is they'll go, "Oh, I don't have acne, so it's not me." But there's hundreds of thousands of chemicals that have been added to our food supply and our environment
Sure.
and then our body care products, and it's about a total load. It's not usually just one thing. It's like you have a bucket and everybody has a certain size bucket, and you've got 50 faucets every day that's dripping into that bucket. It is going to overwhelm the system, and those things cause DNA damage and mitochondrial damage, and then you get this sort of ensuing change. I think the other thing that people don't realize is many cancers are relatively slow growing.
Yeah.
And so they're slowly brewing, and most of our treatment standards or what we like to pretend is really identification, right? It's not really prevention, it's identification. Whether it's a mammogram or something else like that, that we have all these environments that we're basically stewing all of these cancer changes that are potentially there. And it's we need a more holistic approach, which was why I was so excited when I met you to talk about your labs. And so I want you to talk about, because you said a few things to me that I think nobody in, I would say, even in the functional medicine and medical community talks about, because I think they don't know it. And number 2, it's so very important because we are looking at cancer treatment incorrectly. And I want you to talk about suppression messages and how the tumors and little circulating cells are talking to each other and what they're up to, because this is super important.
So, so to your points. So, first of all, like, you're right about a lot of other toxicity. I mean, just in the U.S., we have over 10,000 food additives. In Europe, we have 600. And that's grown over the period of time over the last couple of decades. So, there's a lot of that going on. When you think about sort of cancer, you also talked about sort of the screens and how it's done today. You touched on that. If you have a primary underlying tumor, a mass, whether that's breast cancer, ovarian, cervical, lung, pancreatic, liver, bladder, adrenal, thyroid, brain, skin, all the organ tumors, essentially that primary tumor generally does not kill you. What kills you is the tumor sheds tumor cells that circulate through your bloodstream, entitled circulating tumor cells, the acronym for short. And the circulating tumor cells, the CTCs, spread the cancer throughout your body in a process known as metastasis. And the metastatic effects make your biological organs dysfunctional and you die. That's really how you die from cancer. You don't die for this long. And so, what's interesting about that is that CTCs, circulating tumor cells, begin shedding essentially when a tumor is born. You fundamentally can't really go from stage 0 to stage 1 without shedding CTCs. You can't go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, because that is the known underlying mechanism of the spread of metastasis and stage progression as a result. And so, what we do is we look to extract, we built the technology over the last 15 years that allows us to extract those circulating tumor cells from a blood sample. And so we take a blood sample and we filter it in our lab, and we essentially, with these proprietary filters that we developed, and we essentially are able to then extract these cells whole and intact as cellular tissue. So we can take these cells and we can physically and tangibly place them on glass slides, just like you would a tissue biopsy. We can stain them just like you would a tissue biopsy. We give them to a pathologist to examine just like you would a tissue biopsy. And the output is a board certified pathology report just like you would get out of a tissue biopsy. And so what we're doing is we're actually just following standard pathological protocols. The only, not to undermine the technology, but the only novelty really being that we figured out how to extract these circulating tumor cells from the blood sample at samples that are they're significant for clinical and commercial use, essentially 40 milliliters in this case. Now, these CTCs that are floating around share certain physical and mechanical characteristics: size, structure, rigidity, lack of malleability, lack of deformability. They're big, they're hard, they're stiff, they don't bend. Those parameters enable us to selectively capture them. And it turns out that the physical and mechanical characteristics of CTCs are uniform and homogeneous across all solid tumors and their subtypes. As a result, we will catch them indiscriminately, irrespective of source organ, whether they're coming from your lungs, your breast, your ovaries, your cervix, your brain, your skin, so on and so forth, which is what makes it a broad spectrum pan cancer screening method.
Mhm.
Now, today, when you think about sort of traditional allopathic medicine, when you talked about identification, one of the problems is it's very reactive, right?
Yeah.
Unless you have a disease, a condition, or a symptom, they're really not going to do anything. And, that gets into a whole conversation around why that's so. And, it's not
Yes.
preventative, it's not preemptive. It gets into insurance conversations, all kinds of stuff. But basically, you have to be sick. And if you're not sick, they're not going to do anything. And so, these tumors, as you mentioned earlier, they are slow, they are indolent, they can develop over the course of many years at a cellular level. They're generally, you can have rare aggressive mutations that are very acute, but they're generally not acute.
Yeah.
They're known to be slow and indolent. And so what you really want to do is you want to be screening super early, and you want to catch
Right.
them early on at that cellular level when your body can essentially take care of it. And our body is used to killing cancer. It does it every day. A lot of times people ask, doesn't everyone have cancer cells floating around? Well, no, not exactly. So what ends up happening is, as we talked about earlier, we are living biological organisms. We have cellular turnover constantly. Our body makes mistakes, and sometimes it makes erroneous precancerous mutated cells. Fortunately, our immune system, our macrophage or white blood cells, identify them and destroy them. And that's why everyone in this world is not dead from cancer right now. Unfortunately, once in a while, that erroneous replication either evades the immune system, for which there are some mechanisms, or the immune system fails to kill it, whatever the case might be, and it starts to multiply and grow. And that's when a tumor is born. Once that tumor is born in that spot, that's like base camp. It then wants to go find more territory and more land. So, you kind of think of them as like Vikings now, the CTCs that are leaving the primary tumor and going out to sea. And that sea is your bloodstream. And it's looking for more land to take over, to basically raid, pillage, and plunder. And those are your other organs. It's going to go find spots in your pancreas, your stomach, your lungs, your brain, and it's going to set up more camps and it's going to expand. And that's basically what metastasis is. And so that's what's happening with these CTCs in your body, typically speaking. Now, what you talked about in terms of the communication mechanisms, uh, these circulating tumor cells and even the primary tumor, they talk. And they talk through something known as proteomic expression, which is basically signaling proteins on the surface of the cells. They can kind of communicate with each other through those signals. So, one of the things that happens when they treat cancer is you have a primary tumor and they go in for a surgical resection. And one of the challenges with that right now is they have to know where all the tumors are, primary, secondary, tertiary, and make sure that they get all of them. Now, sometimes they do because they do systemic treatment, whether that's chemo, radiation, or what the case might be. But when they go local and they just cut out a mass, the
Mhm.
problem is that mass secretes something known as SPC. And SPC is a suppression chemical that essentially tells the secondary and tertiary tumors stand down. But once you take that primary tumor out, the secretion of SPC stops. And when the secretion of SPC stops, the signal to stand down stops and they flare up. And it's essentially like, look, if you kill the king, the village will go wild. I mean, that's effectively what happens in your body when you cut that out. And I think that's what you were referencing.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that's so important because So if you look at this, because I'm logical and I'm always like, this isn't logical. Why do we do this? So our current cancer treatment is, of course, we identify it, which means it has to get large enough for us to see it. It's never, some of these like pancreatic and gallbladder and liver. By the time we find it, it's usually already has metastatic activity that is extensive. So we find it, we go in and we cut a large portion of stuff around it and lymph nodes and all that stuff. We remove that primary tumor without any attention to the tertiary activity, except for we pray the chemo and the radiation gets it.
Yeah.
And then chemo, let's face it, it's poison, and we're trying to poison the cancer cells faster than we poison the rest of the body, because that's essentially what we're doing.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. I mean, if you look at traditional treatment today, they're gonna basically use surgery, they're gonna use radiation, and they're gonna use chemo. And, if you think about that, like surgery is cutting you, radiation is burning you, and chemo is poisoning you. So if I said to you, hey, you have this condition, I'm going to cure you. And the way I'm going to cure you is I'm going to cut you, I'm going to burn you, and I'm going to poison you. It doesn't sound great. Like there has to be a better way. Now, some of the immunotherapies I think are interesting because
I agree.
they're not as toxic generally. They're more targeted. They're not cutting and burning you. And the problem with chemo is generally they don't know what works. And so what ends up happening is they put you through multiple rounds of chemo, often with multiple drugs on each round. And oftentimes, if the cancer doesn't kill you, the chemo will. And because the toxicity of it on your kidneys, they're nephrotoxic, your liver, your hepatotoxic, it's immunocompromising, your infections flare up and you can die from infection during chemo. All of that becomes a real problem because it is so toxic. What really should be happening if you're going to use something like that is you need to have precision medicine. You need
Yeah.
to know that it actually works. I mean, one of the things that we'll look at in the future is, CTCs that have been extensively and exhaustively studied over the past 30 years. There's thousands of papers on CTCs. One of the things that's known about them, apart from being the fundamental drivers of metastasis in the bloodstream, is that the CTCs have the same reaction to drugs like chemo as the primary tumor. And,
Okay.
and so what you could do in the future is you could take a blood draw, you could filter out and extract the CTCs, and you could test them with 10, 20, 30, 40 drugs and see what it responds to before you inject poison into a human being. And that's really what should be happening, right?
Yeah.
There really shouldn't be this kind of blind throwing spaghetti at the wall, hoping that something kind of sticks while you completely destroy their body.
Yeah, and, even in breast cancer, which I would say is kind of the golden child of cancer, it gets all the money, which, of course, hey, everybody, Komen is not trying to prevent it. They're trying to treat it. They make their money on treatment, not prevention. But the reality is, that's my opinion. I'm just gonna hold it. But the reality is even something like breast cancer, we might have tumor genetics and things like that to make some slight assessment of this drug might work better based on the tumor behavior. We still have a really long road to hoe here, that to get anything close to like what's the right thing for somebody to take, right? And particularly all the other solid tumors, like there, it's just we don't have any good treatment
Yeah.
at all.
No, I don't think so. Like I think there's a lot of work to be done on treatment. Just so much that can be done. I think there's a lot of precision that can be done. I mean, today, if you have cancer, like for example, we were talking about surgery earlier. Well, let's even back up before surgery. Like if you just think about screening, like today, there's only 5 primary screens in
Yep.
traditional medicine, right? You've got mammogram for breast cancer, you've got pap smear for cervical, you've got colonoscopy for colorectal, PSA for prostate, and lung CT for lung. Now, most people don't get a lung CT unless they're smokers or have some kind of history. So you're down to 4. And depending on your
Mhm.
gender, you're not going to do all of them. If you're male, you're not going to go do a mammogram and a pap smear. If you're female, you're not doing a PSA. So what are you really left with? So as a female, you're doing mammogram for breast, you're doing pap smear for cervical, and maybe a colonoscopy for colorectal. And as a male, you're doing PSA for prostate and maybe colorectal for colonoscopies. And so, what about ovarian? What about uterine?
Mhm.
What about esophageal? What about stomach, gastric, kidney, pancreatic, liver, bladder,
Mhm.
brain, skin, thyroid, adrenal, and on and on and on? Most cancers don't have a screen. And that's a fundamental problem. Like even before we get to treatment, they don't detect them early because there is no screen. Pancreatic cancer is a great example of that. Pancreatic cancer is a presumed death sentence.
Yes.
Pancreatic cancer is not a death sentence. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer is probably a death sentence. Stage 1 pancreatic cancer is curable. You just never
Right.
find it. I mean, the only way they really find it is they're doing a procedure in some adjacent organ like your liver. They notice an abnormality in the pancreas. They biopsy it. They go, "Oh, we found pancreatic cancer." And it doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, let's say they find it stage 1, it's broken into 1A and 1B. Survival at 1B
Mhm.
is 85%. Survival at 1A is 92%. Survival at stage 0, where we can detect, is 99%. Like, really, the key to this is just catching it early and having something that's broad spectrum that catches all of these cancers and can detect them, not just procedures that catch a handful. And that too, a
Yeah, it's
handful.
Yeah, because again, too many families have been just destroyed by losing loved ones because it's not caught until the metastatic activity is such that they start getting pain. Like, I've had people, I had a patient years ago pass away from gallbladder cancer, was the primary tumor.
Yeah,
But of course, they didn't know anything was going on until there was metastatic activity in all the bones and they started having pain,
sure.
you know. And I was like, pain's not a good sign in cancer, right?
No, and that
And and the fact that we just don't have a lot of effort going there, and I know your labs are amazing, and I know you've run up against a lot of, let's call them roadblocks to getting into kind of more conventional care environments, and, because new is always scary, to the existing regime, and I think it's a travesty.
yeah, I mean, look, it's new, and I think right now you get a lot of pushback before you get reimbursement. Everyone wants insurance, they want CPT codes, but the process for that is long. Uh,
Very.
it's not really it's very, very long. There's a lot of bureaucracy. It is not efficient, and we're looking at ways to shorten that, but it's going to take time. And in the meantime, it's a cash pay test, and people that fortunately can access it will be able to. But that's where it is, and that's where it's going to be for a little while. Yeah,
Yeah, because I mean, yeah, because just because it has a CPT code doesn't mean it'll get reimbursed either. We have books that are, inches thick that are there. But I think if people were to look at the cancer check labs as a screening tool, that they could do at some interval to identify if they're carrying these circulating tumors, I think a lot of people would prefer to do that. Particularly, I look at it and I'm always stratifying risk. It's like, okay, if I have a family history, if I have personal history, if I've been in a job that increases my risk, that now ratchets up that requirement. And I am of the mindset, pay now, pay later,
mhm.
right? I can either wait until it becomes a problem or I have a much greater risk for problem, or I can be a little proactive about it. But I think people can look at it that way and then put it on the spectrum of how they care for themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they should. And the other thing you brought up was sort of with cancer care. Also, how do we measure outcome? So for example, we were talking about surgery. If you go today and you have lung cancer, breast cancer, they're going to image you. They're going to image on the 2D plane. And, that's why, and then they can't accurately image a tumor inside the vasculature in the 3D plane. So when they cut, surgeons cut something known as margin. And margin is excess healthy tissue around the tumor. And the reason they do that is because tumors have tentacles and they don't know where it ends. So they're scooping broader because they don't know where it ends. And they're scooping deeper because they can't accurately image in the 3D plane, hoping, fingers crossed, that they got it. They don't know. And so the way that they measure whether or not that surgical resection or excision was successful is they track you for 5 years. And if 5 years later you're alive and well, they go, great, which by the way is an arbitrary number, anyways. And then
Yeah, it's a guess.
and then if anything happens to you before 5 years, they go, sorry, we'll try again, we'll try something else. I mean, that's a fairly horrific way to measure the success or failure of a treatment modality.
Yeah,
Instead, what should be happening, and we're going to get into this in the future, is we should be enumerating. We should be looking at what's your CTC count, because healthy blood doesn't have CTCs. So if you have a tumor and you cut it out, and then you should have a pre-count before you do your treatment, whether that's surgical, whether that's chemo, radiation, immunotherapy, combinatorial, natural, whatever it is, and you should have a post count. And in that post count, it should decline. If day 3, day 7, day 14, day 30, if that doesn't normalize, then something's wrong. Otherwise, where are these CTCs coming from? You either have residual tumor mass, which is a problem, or
mhm.
if you don't have residual tumor mass and they got it all, you have a secondary or tertiary tumor that's now flaring up, especially now that the SBC suppression chemicals stopped. And so they need to start measuring these types of things so they can intervene again earlier, right? Be a little more preventative than just sort of once again reactive at what happened 5 years later, or did the patient not make it?
Ladies, if you're noticing more fine lines and wrinkles, it's not just about aging, it's about the loss of estrogen. And that affects our skin structure, making it drier, thinner, less firm. But here's the great news: I've created Bias Mastery Cream to help. This luxurious bioidentical estrogen cream supports your natural hydration and elasticity. It's packed with nourishing oils like olive, jojoba, aloe, and coconut, so it feels amazing and helps soften those lines and bring back that healthy glow. I've been using it, and let me tell you, my skin has never looked or felt better. It's smoother, more radiant, and those little cracks and creases are way less noticeable. If you're ready to give your skin some extra love, check out By Est Mastery on the Metabolic Blueprint website. And that's metabolicblueprint.com/, by Est Mastery. That's BIEST Mastery, Mastery. And your face will thank you. To me is mind-boggling that we're kinda like, "Oh, you still alive? Cool. We'll wait till next year and we'll image you again," or whatever, whatever the interval is. It's just, we have better science than that now, obviously, with Cancer Check Labs. Now, one of the other things that I was super excited about, and it's not available yet, of course, but it's the opportunity that your filtration system has long term. Are you willing to kinda talk about that? Because of course, I was like, pardon me. Oh, hell yeah, people. This is amazing, right?
So
Because this is how cancer care should go.
yeah, so as we talk about sort of these therapeutic modalities, right? We have surgery to cut you, we have radiation to burn you, we have chemo to poison you. Great. So, but here's the thing, like what we did was we developed a large scale filter that can extract these CTCs. And, basically no one's ever really gotten past 9 milliliters, which is 2 teaspoons of blood. And all the research has been done with these research scale technologies that process half a milliliter of blood to 9 milliliters of blood. And that's it. They don't get past that. And so what we did was we built, and no one's done 10 really. We built a filter that can do over 10,000. That's a 1000x 3 order of magnitude disruptive breakthrough in cancer. And that's what's unlocking all these previously inconceivable diagnostic and therapeutic applications. Now, the reason we built such a large scale filter is not to do cancer screening. For cancer screening, we take 40 milliliters, not 10,000. And so
Yeah.
now what's the difference between 10,000, 1,000, 110? Basically a scissor. It's a surface area. Just cut a smaller filter. That's all. And
Mhm.
so the reason we built this large scale one is because the human body typically has about 5,000 milliliters of blood, plus or minus, depending on body weight. And so the thought was if we know that CTCs are the drivers of metastasis, remember, you don't die from the lump generally, you die from
Never. Hardly ever.
hardly ever
Rare, rare, rare.
die from this spread, right? So you got to stop this spread. And so if you know CTCs are driving that in the bloodstream, what if we could take your blood out and just filter it and then return it back in? And essentially just cleanse it, right? And this is known as plasmapheresis, which is blood
Mhm.
filtration, and we extract all the CTCs from that and put it back in. So we have built prototypes of these, and we're looking at taking that. That's a device that will need to go through the FDA,
Yep.
but as it does, that will be a new therapeutic modality because as you know in this case one that is completely non-toxic, there's no drugs involved
Yeah.
in the blood thinner maybe so you don't clot. It's your own blood, so there's no RH factors, there's no HLA typing, hemolytic antigen to make sure that there's compatibility with tissue and donations and stuff like that. There's no
Yeah.
real infectious risk because you're not getting a blood donation, you're getting your own blood. And it's super fast as well. Like we can do your bloodstream twice over in about an hour.
Wow.
And, and kidney dialysis takes 3.5, 4 hours,
Yeah.
and ours is much faster. And it's because it's a totally different mechanism of action. While they're both doing blood filtration, they're doing them for different purposes. When you do
Yeah.
kidney dialysis, it's because your kidney has failed and essentially cannot remove toxins. And so the way that that machine works inside of it is something known as an ion exchange membrane. And that ion exchange membrane is like a magnet. It creates this magnetic force. And so what ends up happening is the blood, they have this force that's coming from this ion exchange membrane in kidney dialysis. They have the
Yeah.
blood that's going through it, and it's grabbing all the metallic toxins. And that's one of the, and because it's like kind of this magnet that grabs metallic like toxins, that's the reason that one of the primary side effects of kidney dialysis is electrolyte deficiency. because it grabs
Totally.
the electrolytes. And because it's this magnetic force that has to grab them, if the blood goes too fast, it won't be able to catch them. So you're rate limited. It can only go so fast to give it enough time to use that force to capture those out. And that's why it's slow. We, on the other hand, use a mechanical size separation filter. There's no ion
Mm.
exchange membrane, there's no magnetic field. It's blood going through and physically being filtered where everything's going through besides basically the CTCs. And so because of that, we're not rate limited, we can go much faster. And that's what enables us to do it in about an hour twice over for your bloodstream.
Yeah, I mean, like, I look at that and I go, "Okay, so long before you go in for your lumpectomy, long before you go in," obviously checking the tumor cells and seeing what their behavior is like, seeing what drugs would work, obviously that, but that should be integral part of your treatment, pre-lumpectomy, pre-chemo, post-chemo, or whatever it is you're doing. Ideally, that should be all part of that because your likelihood of survival is gonna rapidly go up if you could get rid of those.
Correct. Correct. It's going to dramatically increase. I think it's dramatic, the effects of it, because you're also stopping metastasis, right?
Yeah.
Limiting it. You're just probabilistically, mathematically, you're going to slow it down if you're taking
Yeah.
circulating tumor cells. And that's really the problem that you're trying to stop with cancer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when I met you, I was like, "I'm gonna donate my body. Go ahead and filter." He's like, "You probably don't have any." I'm like, "I know, just in case."
Well, that's one of the nice things about it is, it's likely, very, very safe. It's
Yeah.
own blood, it's just filtration, it's putting it back in, you're not losing a lot of blood or anything like that. You're not dealing with, again, any compatibility issues, you're not putting in any toxins or drugs alongside with it. It's just filtering your blood. And that's really all it is. And so I think it'll end up being a very safe therapeutic modality in the future and can have substantial impact on cancer outcomes. I mean, even for late stage patients, if they caught it, stage 4 and they're fully metastasized, you still want to slow it down. You talked about
Yeah.
the example where it got into their bones and they had pain. That's because it metastasized.
Oh, yeah.
And their pain will increase as it continues to metastasize. So just in terms of increasing quality of life, even for an end stage patient, or giving them a little extra time, I think it has potential to do that as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I wanna talk a little bit before we end, I wanna talk a little bit about some other screening tools that are out there that has gotten a lot of, airplay, but there's a big difference between your technology and theirs, and there's a lot of, sensitivity and specificity that I think people need to understand so they can really make an informed decision on what they choose to do.
Right. So, there's a few things. So I'll put them in categories. There's our test, which is taking out whole intact cells, CTCs. Then there's another bucket of tests which deal with either biomarkers or ctDNA, and I think you're referring to the ctDNA one. So I'll talk about both. With biomarkers, it's people looking for like BRCA1, BRCA2, for example. Well, that's fine. But that doesn't mean you have cancer. It doesn't mean you'll ever even develop cancer. It just means you have an increased risk of developing it at some point. It's not as useful because let's say you are BRCA1, BRCA2 positive. What are you going to do? You can be like Angelina Jolie and you can go get a double mastectomy, and I don't fault her for that. Cancer is a very scary thing. And she's afraid that she won't find it till stage 3, stage 4 when it's fatal. But she would never do that if you could screen early and detect it at stage 0, where survival is 99%. You would just screen more regularly. You would never take such an invasive procedure. The next stat of this is what's called ctDNA, which is circulating tumor DNA, as opposed to circulating tumor cell. A circulating tumor cell is a biological cell. It is a messed up, mutated, dangerous, cancerous, malignant, aberrant cell, but it's a cell. And it has the components of a cell. It has a nucleus, it has a genome with the DNA sequence, cytoplasm membranes, blah, blah, blah. So when that cell is dislodged from the primary tumor, typically one of 3 events is going to occur in the bloodstream. A, it's going to go through programmed cell death, cell apoptosis. B, it's going to get eaten by your macrophages, looks like a Pac-Man kind of crunching it and fracturing it. Or C, it'll run through your capillaries, traverse it, where the shear forces, the physical stresses will fracture the cell and blow it up. When any of these events occur, the cell and its components break into all these little bits and pieces, including the genome. So the DNA sequence breaks into a bunch of pieces, little bits and scraps, little scripts and scraps of DNA, incomplete scripts and scraps of DNA start floating around your blood. What these tests are trying to do, like Grail Gallery, like Cologuard, like Garden Shield, is take these little scripts and scraps of ctDNA, put them in a black box, apply a set of magical algorithms, some mystical set of algorithms, AI, artificial intelligence, ML, machine learning, NGS, next generation sequencing, heavy computational processing, and extrapolate and guess whether or not they have a tumor cell. The problem with that is it is a guess. And typically it's a bad guess. And there's many reasons for that. We don't guess. We take out the whole cell so you can actually look at it on a slide. Now, that guessing is problematic because number one, it results in a massive false positive rate. They don't
Yeah.
have enough scripts and scraps of DNA. It's not the whole genome. It's not even close. It's highly incomplete. So they have to, number one, amplify the signal, for which they use a technique called PCR. And PCR is used for amplification for viral detection typically. You get pricked, you're in the hospital, you need a rapid HIV test. They don't have enough signal yet. They don't have enough viral load, essentially. They amplify. That's fine. But when you try to amplify DNA scraps are highly unstable. You will mutate them.
Yeah.
And because you mutate them, that results in a healthy sample coming in, the DNA getting amplified and mutated, and a false positive coming out. I mean, Grail Gallery's data out there, their false positive rate is 56.9%. It's absurd.
Which means it's not valid. Yeah, like, at that point, that's not valid.
Flip a coin. You'll only be
Yeah,
wrong 50% of the time, not 57. You'll be better off.
yeah.
And the second problem is the sensitivity is no good. And the reason the sensitivity is no good is because these little scripts and scraps don't provide enough signal. Like they had to release data at AACR, Annual American Cancer Research Conference, in May. And when they did, they in that particular study, and I don't think they want to release the data, they said their stage zero detection was zero, stage one
Mhm.
was 3%, stage two was 5%, stage three was 15%. You're missing 85 to 100% of stage 0 to stage 3 cancer, and that is useless for an early cancer detection test. And so a lot of
Yeah.
times people ask, how do they get off the ground? Like if that's the case. And interestingly, they followed the Theranos playbook. And so for
Oh,
those that are familiar with Theranos,
yeah.
what happened there was they basically faked the black box, right? They faked the data and they convinced Walgreens, a large, legitimate anchor customer, to sign up. And as soon as they did that, everyone assumed that it works. And the market kind of just followed and said, oh, if Walgreens has vetted it, it works.
Yeah.
Grail thought this was a great playbook. Grail did the same thing. They went to the UK and set up a giant clinical trial for 140,000 patients, for which the UK government, the NHS National Health System, was paying 150 million British pounds, which is about 200 million US dollars, which goes up
Mhm.
to a little over $1,400 a test, which, by the way, is 50% above retail. So no one could understand why the UK government 4 years ago was paying 50% above retail to run this giant clinical trial for this startup. Well, the reason came out in September, October in the British Medical Journal. It's because the parent company that acquired Grail paid off David Cameron, the Prime Minister
Oh
of
my
the
gosh.
UK. And so it's the same thing. They went illegitimately, undeservingly got this giant anchor customer, and then they came back to the US and told all the doctors, hey, look, the UK government's vetted us. You should use us. And that's how they got their traction, despite the tech
Yeah.
being, you know, pretty useless, frankly.
Right. Well, and there's other conditions that can have cell-free DNA floating around too, like autoimmune conditions and things like that. So you can get so many false positive for so many reasons.
Mhm.
And especially I don't think there's anything other than maybe Alzheimer's and, when you're in my age and older that's kind of scary, but cancer strikes fear into everybody,
Sure.
right? Just say the word, and I was like, a false positive on a test like that is brutal. That, like, you just can't walk around with that. So I agree that I think, I'm surprised that they're still around,
and
honestly.
and that's why, well, they're having some problems, but that's why, I mean, the parent company, Illumina, that bought them, dumped them in June. So they became an orphan
Okay.
public company. And,
Yeah.
30% of the workforce left last year. They had a massive layoff, 350 people. So,
Yeah.
they're having some challenges, as they should, given what's happening there. But yeah, false positives are definitely very, very dangerous. It's one of the reasons you need tissue. Like,
Yeah.
we extract the cellular tissue, and put it on a slide. Tumor cells look very different than healthy cells generally. They're usually larger, 30, 40 microns instead of 8 or 10. They have multiple has multiple nuclei, 5, 6 nuclei instead of 1 or 2. They are hyperchromatic. They have too much DNA because each nucleus has a genome with DNA. So, they can comprise even, 85% of the cell sometimes rather than 15 or 20. And so they have high NC ratios, nuclear cytoplasmic ratios, because they're so heavily nucleated. I mean, these features are so pronounced that my 7-year-old daughter could look at that and tell you it's weird.
Yeah.
Um,
She's like, "Okay, that one doesn't look like the other ones." Like, it's not, hard to identify a cancer circulating cancer cell.
Yeah, a board certified pathologist that spends their life studying cells and tissue isn't about to mistake, some giant
Yeah.
multinucleated hyperchromatic cancer cell, tumor cell for a white blood cell or a healthy cell. It just doesn't really happen very often. And that's why you can control, the false positive rate. And that's why the
Yeah.
specificity of our test is near perfect.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's so, so very important, and I think, especially the people that are on that preventative bandwagon that really, really wanna be proactive about their health, they should commit to doing cancer check labs at some sort of interval, and especially when your risk is higher, like, Sumit knows, I was like my husband just knows he gets told that he has blood work coming, I'm like, "Just go to the office."
Well,
He doesn't know what he's testing. I'm like, "Just go," because I want him screened and I need to be screened, but I think it's important for people to just go, "Okay, that's one of the things that I do at some sort of committed interval to just be sure, because you wanna catch it before you can see it. That's the answer behind cancer.
for
Catch it before you can see it.
absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
I was just going to say the last modality that, you talked about was sort of imaging.
Oh, yes.
Right? So these full body MRIs that are out there, like Pernuvo and Ezra.
Mhm.
So, there, I think you have some challenges as well. I don't think Pernuvo's technology was really ready for prime time. I think what happened was they built something that was very interesting and promising, and they found out that they could start selling scans in a location, and it started cash flow. And then the VCs, the venture capitalists, got involved and said, "Oh, we can make money off of this, so let's scale it out." And, as a result, the former founder of Pernuvo, who's the person that developed the technology and was their chief medical officer, left. He actually didn't think that it was ready just yet to go into prime time and be scaled out that way for patient care. And a few weeks ago, he ended up joining us. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, he joined our advisory council, and him and I are now in conversations about essentially creating a much better, higher resolution imaging modality for that would be ready for prime time in the future. And
Yeah.
pair that so you get a positive, negative off our test, and then if it's positive, then you go to imaging to look for it. And that's what
Yeah. 'Cause I think that's the next thing, most people go, "Okay, we find it in the blood, what's the next thing?" Next thing is high value, high quality imaging that can go look for it and especially identify it when it's small, that's what we want. And so you kinda need to pair the both together, but you only need to do the imaging if the cancer cell's found circulating in the blood, which I think for a lot of people is just nobody likes an MRI. Man, nobody wants to sit in the tube.
and
So why do it if you don't have to?
for sure, yeah, it's not this spa-like experience that they purport. You go into this tube, it's very claustrophobic. Often they strap you down with something like a straitjacket because you're not supposed to move.
Yep.
And by the way, you'll come out of this thing and, it's very sensitive on soft tissue. So
Yes.
as we age, our bodies change. They develop bumps, lumps, lipomas, cysts. It doesn't mean you have cancer. You go in there
Yep.
and they'll come out and they'll say, "Okay, you have 27 lumps and bumps." Well, are they cancerous? Don't know. So for something that purports to be a cancer screening tool, it doesn't actually tell you whether or not there's cancer there. It just tells you have lumps and bumps. Now, what are you going to do with that information? You're
You gotta go track it down.
Yeah, no one's going to chop you open and do 27 biopsies. That's just too much. And so it's it creates this sort of pseudo false positive risk and a lot of this anxiety because now you have all these bumps. You don't know if they're cancerous or not. You start worrying about them, which then has sort of corollary effects with your hormonal profile because of
Yep.
the stress. Start affecting your cortisol levels, you start affecting other things, and all of that can, sort of create a breeding ground for cancer as well. It can actually backfire in some sense.
Yeah.
At least
Yeah, I mean, I had it done, 'cause I everybody knows who I'm the human guinea pig. I'm like, "What is it? Okay, I'll do it and see what happens." And, I had 3 major things, like look like major things, something on the spine, something in the nasal passages. I had a friend die from nasal, pharyngeal cancer, so of course you go, "Oh, crap." And then something in my abdomen that we had to follow up, and it was nothing, but there is follow-up that must happen. And so I would have patients ask me about, "Hey, should I go do this?" And I'm like, "Dude, if you're over 50, you need to commit to yourself emotionally that you're going to have 2 to 5 things you're going to have to track down that may or may not be important. But if this would freak you out, don't do it." Because we have, like you said, lumps and bumps and cysts and weird stuff that may not be anything, but you now that it's been seen, you got to go identify if it's something important or not. And so, I've had some people do it, but it's definitely something that I'm like, it's hard to do because then you're trying to get in with people, and it's a little bit we need more precision. That's what it really comes down to. We need more precision, and that's why I'm so excited about your labs. So tell my listeners how they can find you.
Sure. So right now, just go to cancerchecklabs.com. And with cancerchecklabs.com, you can buy the test online. It's available in 47 of 48 continental United States right now. The last state we're working on the license, we're close to the final steps, is New York, but everywhere else in the country, it's available. And yeah, it's fun. And then we have opened up Canada as well, if there's people in Canada listening. So it's available in Canada, and we're about to expand internationally. We actually just signed a deal with 140 clinics in the UK.
Nice.
So we're starting to see some of that international growth. And I think it's really easy. And we can of course come to your practice. You're one of our partners, and you can
Yeah.
the test as well. That's another way to do it. And so that's the way that people are accessing it today. And we're starting
Yeah.
to see some interest from organizations, enterprises now. I want to screen
Yeah.
employees and stuff like that too.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely excited as a partner, to utilize the test and help people screen. I think a lot of it is helping people. It's helping people understand, which is why I so much wanted to have on the podcast, is understand the technology and how it works and how valuable it is as a screening tool. Yeah, it's not inexpensive, but a lot of people that are in the functional medicine world are spending money on a lot of different tests.
Sure.
And if this is a concern you have, you should allot some of that money instead of food sensitivity testing or whatever else you might be up to looking at this, right? Especially as you get older, because you want to catch it before it becomes visible.
I mean, look, cancer overtook heart disease as the number one cause of mortality in 2019 for many high income developed countries. Like that was in the Lancet. And so, if you want to live a long time, if you're concerned about functional medicine and longevity and these sorts of things, the one thing you have to do is not die from cancer.
Right.
Like all the other stuff's important too, but that's like fundamentally one thing you need to do. And the impact of that is tremendous because look, last year alone, there were 10 million recorded deaths in cancer. Over the course of 100 years, that's 1 billion lives lost, double-digit percentages of global population. There are not many things on the planet that actively threaten double-digit percentages of global population. I mean, to put that in perspective, 1 billion lives in 100 years, if you were to add up all fatalities from all known wars in human history, the total is 350 million. You're talking
Yeah.
about a loss of life from cancer in just 100 years. That's 3x of that. And so now that if you can detect at stage 0, survival is 99%. You can save those lives. And to your earlier point, you want to detect it super early before it's sort of popping up on imaging and these sorts of things much later, and lots of bumps and lumps and big tumors and spread and bone metastases and pain. I mean, we've now had 2 confirmed cases, and we'll actually have our first few now that we've been in the market for a few months. We opened the lab in June, where we've had positives, where they actually went through a health optimization protocol and functional, and then had a negative.
Yeah.
And so we've seen 2 lives that, we've saved, and so it's really great.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's where our world comes in is, if you can get to the bottom, the root cause of all of those things that lead to cellular changes and things like that, you can actually get it before it set up its house and sort of roosted into a tissue, right? That's our goal, is to really, really use good medicine that way
Yes, and remember, your immune system generally knows how to kill this. You're developing those cancer cells like we talked about all the time. Your body's
all the time.
killing it. It just missed it. So if you get it early enough and you can sort of optimize your immune system, there's a very good chance it will just destroy it,
Yeah.
resolve it without having to go through all this toxicity down line.
Yeah, yeah. So Sumit, I've been so happy to have this conversation, and I'm glad we were able to get it back on the calendar. And so I'm so happy you've been here, and I'm excited to be your partner, clinic and everything else. It's just amazing. I can't wait. I can't wait to see where you take it.
I appreciate it. Thanks for
A-
having me. I love chatting.
ab- Absolutely. Okay, everybody, thank you for listening to Menopause Mastery. Go out and check out Cancer Check Labs. Make sure that you have that screening because you know the numbers. It's one of those things you just got to put on your bucket list of health things that you need to do on a regular basis. And then I'll be back with you next week.